2018, landowners were invited to a community meeting at the Woolshed Cafe. The purpose of the meeting was to discuss the formation of a biodiversity group. It wasn't without its controversies. But once that was dealt with, the magic happened. By 2020, with over 4,000 hectares of private land, most with significant natural areas, it became evident that it would be crucial to attract significant funding for the scale of work required. As a result, the group decided to establish a trust. 9 landowners took up positions as chair, trustees and project manager. Over the past 5 years, the trust has invested $647,000 in restoring and protecting the ecosystems on Tākaka Hill that all New Zealanders can enjoy. 70% goes straight towards work on the ground. The Trust has also established collaborations with various organisations. These include Doc Motueka and Tākaka, with whom we have a Memorandum of Understanding, the Nelson Cave Group, Ravensdown, the forestry industry, TDC, MPI and Massey University are also included. From the outset, we have had a circular ecosystem approach that values all ecosystem components. It allows us to learn more about the intricate relationships and dependencies within ecosystems, ultimately leading to more effective and sustainable conservation practices. Also, we recognised that focusing on a single species would not be sufficient to halt New Zealand's biodiversity decline. Such an approach would exacerbate other threats and create further imbalances within ecosystems, leading to unforeseen consequences. Most of our landowners recognise the interconnectedness of species and ecosystems. By taking a circular ecosystem approach, we could enhance the efficiency of conservation efforts, build resilience within ecosystems to adapt to environmental changes, and uphold the cultural and spiritual values associated with Tākaka Hill. Before initiating any control work, we contracted Kaitiaki o Ngahere's ecologist to conduct a survey to identify pest plants and the extent of their invasion on private land. The survey resulted in developing a strategy and a 5-year action plan. Banana passion vine, old man's beard, wilding pines and cotoneaster are the significant weed threats on Tākaka Hill. Old man's beard and banana passion vine have not spread to higher elevation areas of the hill. They are found in Hobson's Corner on the Rewaka side of the State Highway and in a private native forest gully leading down to Maraho. Our contractor, MAD Conservation, is focusing on the gully, and Tasman Pines has controlled these weeds in their Douglas pine forest that borders this farmland. Unfortunately, Waka Kotahi's road reserve funding is allocated in 3-year blocks, and the current block does not include road reserve control. Funding confirmation for the next block, 2024 to 2027, will not be known until next year. To play our part in the call to action by Predator Free 2050, we implemented Phase 1 of a trapping program, deploying 400 Trapinator mustelid tunnels. These tunnels were placed in significant natural areas where we had the social licence with landowners. Landowners have taken responsibility for monitoring smaller trap lines on their properties. In more remote areas, we have a contractor with the expertise and social licence to monitor the longer trap lines in remote and challenging locations. All data collected from the traps are recorded in the TrapNZ database. It provides valuable insights into our trapping program, allowing us to make informed decisions and adjust our control strategies. Wilding pines are a significant problem on the hill. Having identified where they are and the scale of invasion with our survey, we applied to the MPI Jobs for Nature Wilding Pine Community Partnerships Program. Our application resulted in a grant of $119,000 for the first year, followed by an allocation of $250,000 for the second and third years. In the second year, we extended our control to include public conservation land bordering private land. The Canaan Road Reserve was also included in the second year, with traffic management funded by TDC Transportation. In line with our commitment to supporting local businesses, we contracted Kaitiaki o Nehere and MAD Conservation and Tasman Tree Works to carry out the control work. This fostered a sense of ownership and responsibility within the community, ensuring the effectiveness of our control efforts, contributing to the local economy and strengthening community bonds. One of our smaller projects is caring for Hawke's Lookout, a site renowned for its breathtaking views and ecological importance. We support Doc Motueka's efforts by conducting 3 to 4 working bees annually. 2 of our landowner volunteers regularly check the site throughout the year. Our work includes weed control and planting cleared areas with eco-sourced natives. We have recently installed a small trap line, a cat trap, and a macrocarpa bench set funded by Network Tasman and installed by Doc Motueka. Goats have significantly impacted the native habitat of Tākaka Hill. To address this, the Trust partnered with Ravensdown, receiving funding from them to carry out a 3-year goat control project on private land bordering the Abel Tasman National Park. The program began in November 2022. The blue dots are goats that have been killed, and the red lines are the track logs of our contractors' movements across boundaries to reassure landowners who have not given us approval to shoot goats on their land. Over time, we can build a picture of where the goats gather and where they move to and from the park. It is worth noting that the proposed Indigenous Habitat Corridor, which connects the Abel Tasman with the Kahurangi National Park, includes retired farmland. This land is part of our goat control program and will contribute to restoring the native vegetation and ecosystems on Tākaka Hill. The Habitat Restoration Project on Tākaka Hill involves propagating and revegetating Indigenous species at Ravensdown Ngarua Limeworks. Ravensdown, a partner of the Trust, funds the restoration work in areas where quarrying has been discontinued on their site. This project is crucial to the Trust's long-term habitat restoration efforts. Vespula wasps compete for the same honeydew food source as many of our native species. Our wasp baiting project began in 2020 with a successful application to the Motueka Community Board. The Trust purchased Vespex to distribute to Tākaka Hill landowners, with installed bait stations that are rebaited each year. The Trust has a volunteer propagation team that collects seed from private land for propagating and planting in restoration areas. It's also an opportunity for the community to come together and learn about natives that grow on the hill and how to raise plants from seed and contribute to planting in root trainers and pots. Thanks to its complex geological history, Tākaka Hill is home to a variety of unique species. The Trust, with funding from the Rata Foundation grant, collaborated with Anna Stewart from the New Zealand Speleological Society to survey the subterranean habitat and cave fauna on Tākaka Hill. This inaugural survey was part of the Trust's ongoing efforts to restore and protect the area's ecosystems. The survey successfully identified important cave fauna sites, which will be prioritised for biodiversity management by the Trust. The Trust is working with science advisors Steve Truick from Massey University and Mary Morgan Richards from Massey University to collect cave weta, cave entrance and troglodyte samples for DNA barcoding. But it doesn't stop there. The circular ecosystem approach takes into account the people that live in the community. So how can we support the community that live on Tākaka Hill? The Recycling Depot project is very much part of our circular ecosystem approach. In 2020, a partnership was formed with Ravensdown, who provided the land and built the depot. And with TDC community funding, we established a community-managed recycling depot for Tākaka Hill residents. Previously, most waste and recycling from Tākaka Hill had to be personally transported to the Motueka Resource Recovery Centre. However, thanks to this initiative, Smart Environmental collects our recycling every Monday when it drives over the hill to collect the Tākaka recycling. With a focus on community well-being, the Trust has installed a defibrillator and recently acquired emergency medical trauma kits, funded once again by the TDC Community Fund. The Trust has a long-term goal of restoring and protecting retired farmland to create a habitat corridor that connects Abel Tasman and Kahurangi National Parks. This ambitious initiative aims to enhance biodiversity and promote the movement of species between these conservation areas. By converting retired farmland into a habitat corridor, the Trust envisions a connection that contributes to species recruitment, ultimately contributing to the overall health and resilience of the ecosystems in both parks. This restoration and protection effort not only benefits the native flora and fauna, but also provides opportunities for research, education and ecotourism. Outcome monitoring is essential to demonstrate two things. Number one, our funders a return on their investment, that what we are doing is achieving biodiversity outcomes. Number two, the importance of adaptive management, so that it informs us when our restoration and protection efforts are not working, so that we can alter what we are doing. Monitoring outcomes are equally important as control work, and we have 3 monitoring programs. Acoustic recording of bird calls is a valuable tool for assessing the resurgence of native birds. The Trust uses this method, which is less labour intensive and provides more consistent and accurate identification of bird songs than relying on volunteer identification skills and hearing. Additionally, all recordings are stored as sound files, allowing for ongoing review and analysis as software and artificial intelligence continue to advance. The Trust plans to monitor populations of 2 threatened land snails, Pauelephanta, Hochstetterai and Ritida species in the QE2 covenanted Tākaka Hill walkway. Preliminary snail transect surveys were conducted to determine the best location for a 70 square metre monitoring plot. Surveys within the plot will be conducted, pending funding, using N-mixture modelling, which does not require snail handling. The Trust works with herpetologist Graham Usher to monitor artificial cover objects on transects across reported lizard habitats. This is to determine the population trends of 2 relatively common endemic lizards, the northern grass skink and the Raukawa gecko. So if they start to disappear, we know we're in trouble. The less frequently occurring Nelson green gecko will be surveyed through folio visual survey and nighttime survey for eye and belly shine. So remember we talked about the Trust's circular ecosystem approach. In December 2023, where are we now? Well, most of our projects are on hold. Other projects are being undertaken in a limited capacity, with only 3 projects ongoing. This is where we are with no funding. So having spent the last 5 years doing our part as a community to halt the decline of New Zealand's biodiversity, here we are. Most of our projects are on hold or are done in a limited way to go on hold eventually. So let's have a look at recent funding grants. The DOC Community Conservation Fund 2023 had 234 applicants totalling 59 million. 7.2 million was available and 32 applications were funded. Ours wasn't one of them. Lottery's Environment and Heritage Grant 2022 had 89 applications totalling 28.1 million, with only 5.8 million available. And we were not successful, along with many other community conservation groups. The Lottery's Environment and Heritage Grant 2023 had 46% less funding than last year. Once again, we were not successful, along with many other community conservation groups. We're still waiting to hear about our Rata Foundation 2023 grant. That decision should be coming soon. We do have a small grant from Ravensdown for goat control, and we've had some small grants from Tasman District Council for herbicide and also for the medical trauma kits. Funding is a pressing concern for community groups across the country. Shockingly, only 3 organisations were granted funding in the 2023 DOC Community Conservation Round. Even more disheartening, the same 2 and an international organisation, also received funding from the Lotteries Environment and Heritage 2023 grant. It is worth noting that these organisations do not fall under the category of community groups. The reduction and oversubscription of environmental funding creates significant challenges for community conservation, particularly regarding long-term sustainability and achieving strategies that rely on communities taking action. Community groups planning and implementing long-term conservation strategies will no longer be able to carry out activities like ongoing monitoring, adaptive management, and continuous engagement with key partners and stakeholders. Without stable financial support, community-led conservation will stall and eventually stop. The remarkable growth of community conservation groups nationwide is a testament to the powerful message of organisations like the Predator Free 2050 Trust, Predator Free New Zealand, the National Wild and Conifer Programme, and NGOs like Forest and Bird. They have successfully inspired landowners to join the cause. The success of achieving the DOC strategy, the Biodiversity strategy, the Tuatataia Predator Free strategy, the Regional TDC Biodiversity strategy, and the Kotahitanga Mō Te Taio strategy relies on communities taking action. The dedication and selflessness of community groups, volunteers and private landowners propel these efforts forward. However, the recent distribution of grant funding has been unfair, favouring non-community organisations over genuine community groups. This unjust allocation undermines the hard work of those already committed to conservation and diminishes the overall impact of local conservation endeavours. This disparity must be addressed promptly to ensure the continuous progress and collective impact of community-led conservation, as they are the ones at place who have already made significant contributions and continue to do the necessary work. It is also important to acknowledge the challenges posed by the increasing inequality of New Zealand, which means more New Zealanders are struggling to put a roof over their head and food on the table, with little if any time to consider a biodiversity crisis and time to volunteer. The number of volunteers from the older generation comprises most of a decreasing cohort of volunteers. Without sufficient resources, there is a risk that private land may once again become a refuge for predators and pests, undermining the ongoing work in national parks and reserves. To address this, fostering a sense of inclusivity, encouraging diverse participation, and providing adequate support and funding for community-led conservation initiatives is crucial. To grasp the shortcomings of these strategies and funding organisations, we need to examine the constraints that impede attaining their objectives. So let's have a closer look at the limitations of strategies and funding approaches. Subjectivity. Assessment criteria introduce bias and inconsistency in decision-making. This can result in unfair judgments and prevent deserving projects from receiving support, negatively impacting community conservation efforts. Balancing multiple priorities is challenging when there are various criteria to consider. Making trade-offs becomes necessary, and some priorities may be prioritised over others, neglecting community conservation projects. Quantifiable criteria, like cost-effectiveness, can be measured to some extent. However, others such as cultural significance or community support are difficult to quantify. This makes objectively comparing and prioritising projects challenging, potentially overlooking valuable community conservation initiatives. Limited capacity for assessing projects against multiple criteria takes time and resources, and limited capacity can result in an incomplete or inconsistent assessment process, potentially hindering community conservation efforts by not thoroughly evaluating projects. So one has to wonder if limited capacity was the reason for the delay behind the DOC Community Conservation Fund and the Lotteries Environment and Heritage Fund. And one also has to wonder if the 234 applicants to the DOC Community Conservation Fund were thoroughly examined Indeed, this could also be said for the 89 applications to the Lotteries Fund. And the limitations of strategies and funding approaches continues. The lack of clear guidelines and transparency in decision-making raises concerns about fairness and integrity. This can undermine trust in the approach and impact community conservation efforts. Assuming that the best available information and practices are used for the assessment, they may become outdated as the context changes. New information and practices may emerge, requiring a review and updating of assessment and funding criteria to ensure they remain relevant and effective in achieving community-led conservation goals. Failure to address how conflicts between criteria will be resolved or how trade-offs will be made can also lead to challenges in decision-making. When projects have conflicting impacts or when prioritising between different criteria is necessary, the absence of clear guidelines will affect decision-making and compromise community-led conservation efforts. So how can we address these limitations? Well, assessment criteria must be clearly defined and standardised to minimise subjectivity and ensure consistency in decision-making. Provide clear guidelines and examples for each criterion to reduce interpretation variations. Where possible, develop objective measures or metrics for assessing project outcomes. This can help compare the impact of different projects and reduce subjectivity in decision-making. Prioritise the assessment criteria based on their importance and relevance to strategies and desired outcomes. This can help make trade-offs between conflicting criteria and ensure that the most critical aspects are appropriately considered. Allocate sufficient resources and expertise to the assessment process to ensure thorough and consistent evaluation. This will involve increasing staff or engaging external experts to support decision-making. So, to continue to address the limitations, define clear decision-making processes, including the roles and responsibilities of decision-makers and mechanisms for transparency and accountability. This can help ensure that decisions are made objectively so we can have confidence in the process because, quite frankly, the Trust and many other community conservation groups' trust in the process has been severely undermined. Periodically review and update the assessment criteria to account for changing contexts, emerging information and best practices. This can help ensure the criteria remain relevant and effective in guiding proper evaluations. Incorporate diverse perspectives in the assessment process, including input from relevant stakeholders and experts. This can help mitigate biases and ensure a comprehensive evaluation of projects. Establish a system for monitoring and evaluating the outcomes of supported projects. This can help assess effectiveness and provide insights for the continuous development of strategies and funding. So in conclusion, community-led conservation groups such as the Tākaka Hill Biodiversity Group Trust are indispensable in restoring and protecting New Zealand's ecosystems. Many other groups across the country face similar challenges and must also play a significant role in achieving New Zealand's biodiversity goals. However, long-term funding is crucial for these community-led organisations to plan and execute conservation projects effectively over extended periods. It ensures continuity, allowing for sustained progress and further advancements year after year. With stable and predictable funding, groups can invest in capacity building, training and skill development for their contractors and community members. They can also develop long-term strategies and implement monitoring and evaluation systems to assess the effectiveness of their conservation efforts. Communities at place leading conservation at the local level is vital in reversing the loss of our Indigenous biodiversity. Without adequate funding allocated to community conservation groups, strategies that rely on community action become irrelevant.